Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with SS&C Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm excited to have as my guest, Sean Junk, a managing director with the global advisory firm Sia Partners. Sean has been on the podcast before to talk about the opportunity for intelligent automation in the oil and gas industry. Today, he and I will return our attention to this industry and explore some of the reasons why energy companies seem to have a higher sense of urgency around embracing emerging technology. Welcome back, Sean. Why don't you remind our listeners about yourself and your firm, Sia Partners?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brad. Yeah, so it's good to be back on the podcast with you and with SS&C Blue Prism. So a little background on myself. I went to Texas A&M for my undergrad. I did mechanical engineering as well as nuclear engineering. And for about a decade after I graduated, I worked directly in the oil and gas industry doing EPC capital projects. And then went back to school. I got my MBA at Rice University here in Houston. And then coming out of that, I moved into professional services. I was at Ernst & Young for 5 years, focused on emerging technologies. So this is quantum annealing, RPA, machine learning, artificial intelligence, really studying up on what those technologies are, and then specifically what the use cases would be for power utility oil and gas companies. Joined Sia Partners in 2018. Sia Partners is a global consulting firm. We have a very unique and differentiated skill set in the data science arena. We've got about 300 data scientists creating solutions to industry problems, licensing those to clients, doing custom artificial intelligence and data science work for them. The role that I'm playing now at Sia Partners is really leader of robotic process automation for North America.
Awesome. It's really good to have you back on, Sean. And I should mention that Sia Partners has significantly grown over the last few years. I think when we did our first podcast, you guys were a fraction of the size you are now. And part of that's been organic, but part of it's also been related to a bunch of acquisitions.
First met, I think the firm overall was about 800 people. Just in the span of 4 years, we're already up to 3,000.
Very strong growth for sure. Well, Sean, I always love talking to you about the energy industry and how intelligent automation is making an impact there because you have such a great background in that space. Why don't you give us your current perspective on the energy industry and how things have changed there over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been pretty up and down. Power utility companies not hurt as much, but definitely oil and gas when we were moving into the pandemic. Huge demand erosion, right? People are not traveling. People are not taking vacations. So you're seeing huge reductions in the amount of traffic on roads, cruise ships going out, airplanes flying, et cetera. And so that demand erosion has a really big impact on oil and gas production. And so that was huge, right? I think there's another interesting perspective to bring up, which is in the power utility business, they have been on a huge growth cycle, like literally since electricity replaced kerosene as the popular method of lighting, right? 100 years ago, we're seeing dramatic growth cycles. And this is kind of how our power utility company operates, right? They look at population growth. They understand where people are moving to, and they try to build out infrastructure to serve that population. And so as a power utility company, if you're looking 10 years down the road, thinking about really a ton of variables, what you're thinking about is how many people are going to be living in this area, how many homes are going to be built, how many refrigerators, how many air conditioners, how many heaters are we going to need to power. That's what really powers the entire industry. And then comes along crypto mining. Crypto mining completely upended power utility industry from bottom to top. And so when you're talking about adding 10,000 people into a local area, that's a big change. Right? And those 10,000 people can be a new gigawatt of need with a generation capacity. You bring in one crypto miner, and that can be 1, 2, 3, 10 gigawatts of electricity that's needed. And that can happen overnight. And so when China shut down its crypto mining, a lot of the players that were in China demobilized and they came to North America. There were some cheap electricity prices, specifically in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. And so people flocked in. It was a relatively stable financial market. Physical security is good. It's easy to find cheapish land that they can lease. And so people moved in droves, so much so that the governor in Texas passed a new law about throttling crypto miners if the grid needed special attention, right? If there was a lack of electricity for the grid, crypto mining was the first to go. They would be throttled and they'd put that electricity back into the grid. And so for a lot of 2022, there was several moments, even up to 2 months, crypto miners had to be throttled down so they could dump electricity back to the grid. But if you talk about like a growth curve in power utilities, I mean, that's massive. You're talking about gigawatts of demand showing up literally overnight, really changing the course of the infrastructure needs in the United States.
How about that? I had no idea crypto mining was having that kind of impact. Wow.
And the other part of it that's interesting is kind of a demobilization of people from big urban areas, right? You think about LA, you think about Houston, you think about New York. People were leaving the cities because of the pandemic. They wanted a backyard, they wanted to be in nature. And so you saw a lot of these urban centers demobilized to more rural areas. Well, those areas weren't quite ready for the infrastructure demands or the people moving into those areas. And so it caused a lot of strife with power utility companies, just population movement. You saw a huge influx in Texas, specifically from places like New York, Florida, and California. And so all that had to be calculated in. So it's really upended the industry.
How about the oil and gas side?
On the oil and gas side, it's been super interesting as well. I mean, we all know kind of what happened through the pandemic. Demand erosion was really substantial. People were cutting back production left and right. Oil and gas companies were getting into trouble in the public markets. Their brand was tarnished. They were taking on huge amounts of debt. I wrote a white paper about it during the pandemic called the Oil and Gas Debt Crisis, looking at major institutions in oil and gas, like, for example, ExxonMobil, who traditionally are not financially levered more than 2x or 3x, going all the way up to 60x leveraged so that they can continue to pay out dividends and keep their shareholders happy. Or with Russia, you're seeing commodity prices really accelerating up. It's stabilized, it's come down a little bit, but that whole area is really interesting because traditionally what oil and gas companies would do in a scenario like this is they drill more wells, right? There's demand, prices are up. Let's go drill a bunch of wells and let's flood the market and make profit while we can. And you're not really seeing that from a lot of oil and gas companies. Yeah, they're drilling here and there, but not to the extent that you would usually see it in a big commodity upswing like this. Really what you're seeing is oil and gas companies taking major profit, and that's the mode that they're in. They're in to support our share price. They're doing major share buybacks. They're boosting dividends, all in an attempt to make their prices, their stock stable, show a return on their past investments, as well as starting to increase the investment into ESG initiatives, hydrogen, carbon capture, reinjection of CO2, you name it. And so it's been a very tumultuous 2 years for oil and gas. A lot of people putting permits in for pipelines that are not getting approved.
Yep.
You're seeing major companies like TC Energy, which operates Keystone Pipeline, still struggling with HS&E problems, right? They had a major spill. They're about half capacity. But when you look at what it's really doing to the market, just to have one pipeline at half capacity coming into Cushing, Oklahoma, which is the major pricing hub, plus also the physical commodity clearinghouse, the New York Mercantile Exchange. It's a really big deal, right? As those reserves in Cushing go down, the price is going to go up, right? They're going to continue to go up until people produce more and the stockpiles go up to where they need to be. But right now in the middle of the winter, and you're seeing major winter events happen on the East Coast, that's requiring a lot of heating oil, a lot of refinery capacity. And we're seeing problems getting oil into the refineries to actually meet some of those needs. And so the U.S. is in a great spot from an energy security perspective, but a lot of places in the world are not. There's a lot of places like Ukraine specifically, but major operators in Europe like Germany are having a big problem creating energy security for their countries without pulling in major imports from Russia.
What about the labor shortage that seems to be impacting most other industries? Is that being felt as well in the energy sector?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I would say even more than power utilities, it's also happening in oil and gas. Power utilities is more about there's huge demand. We can expand. We need to hire people. And maybe those people aren't there with the type of experience that we need. But in oil and gas, at the current commodity prices, you would expect big players to be drilling like crazy right now. And they're not. And I happen to believe that that's because they can't find the people to come back into the industry to make that happen. I've had interviews with a couple of the super majors, just talking to them, seeing where they're at. There's been a huge flushing out of talent over the last couple of years. There was layoffs, right? There was cutbacks. There were early retirement packages floated. And now we're seeing kind of the effects of that. I think that maybe the oil and gas companies are not drilling the way that they really want to, because they might not have the contractors and they might not have the personnel internally to actually make that happen. There's been a big driving force in the industry called the Great Resignation. Right. People got used to working from home. You see big corporations saying, no, you can't work from home. You're going to have to work from the office 5 days a week. And that's leading to attrition. And that attrition is going to have an impact in the future. And so becoming harder and harder to find qualified, motivated people to come in and help you achieve growth.
Right. So you've covered quite a bit there in terms of challenges, or in some cases, opportunities that are being felt in the energy sector. Are you seeing energy companies in general be more aggressive in terms of using intelligent automation to address some of these issues and opportunities?
Yeah, so it's finally happened. Brett, I've been doing this for 10 years, talking to oil and gas companies, power utility companies, and it's finally happening. And I think it's just a confluence of different factors, right? Difficulty finding people, still needing to expand. Commodity prices are high. Demand is high for power utility companies. And so there's a lot of factors that affect this kind of stuff. And there's still a lot of hurdles that they need to get over. But I'm happy to say that energy companies as a whole, power utility and oil and gas, have the most bots that are in the development mode right now out of almost any other industry. And, you really saw it kick off with the financial services sector. They are still by far the highest adopter of intelligent automation and digital workers. But oil and gas and power utilities, give it a couple of years and moving those bots out of the development mode into production and then start to scale, they're going to be challenging FS for the amount of bots that they're using. Again, still hurdles, right? Still hurdles that they're working through. There's a brain drain that's happening with people, and that's lost some of the necessary process background that you have to program the bot and get it stabilized, et cetera. So that's going to be a hurdle. The second hurdle is going to always be, in oil and gas, which is kind of this siloed mindset. The oil and gas industry was really created about the same time as Henry Ford was pioneering the assembly line. And so a lot of that has to do with sequestering people into one skill set, one talent area, and letting them do what they do very well. But with process automation, end-to-end automation, hyper automation, and the digital workforce, it pays big dividends to see the process from end to end, right? So combining skill sets from end to end. So still a lot of hurdles, but I'm very happy to see the turn towards automation, the turn towards digital workers. Finally, kind of that level of education, that level of adoption is finally starting to take hold. Still some hurdles, but we're getting there.
How do you see automation helping companies minimize environmental and social impact so they can achieve their ESG objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is kind of coupled with the Great Resignation, right? It's hard to find good people, motivated people to come in and fill some of these roles. But it adds even more stress to the situation when you've got new requirements, right? When the SEC comes and says, hey, you're going to have to start publicly reporting what your ESG goals are and how you're planning to achieve those goals. And so it's a big impact to a lot of players. And, I mentioned TC Energy earlier and the Keystone Pipeline. They're actually looking at divesting a pretty substantial amount of their existing pipeline, raise cash so they can invest in hydrogen. And so when you're talking about big companies like TC Energy making moves in the market like that, it's signaling to other people that this is going to be something that's going to stick around and going to be something that's important to the industry long term. When it comes to ESG, when you think about the digital workforce, the areas that you're really seeing, it's going to be starting with compliance, right? There's going to be an influx of new data. You have to understand, okay, what are the volumes of hydrogen? How is the hydrogen being treated? Where is it going? Same on CO2. How is it being produced? Where is it going? How's it being captured? If you really want to get to your ESG goals, you have to report these things. It has to be reported at the state and also at the federal level. And so when you get into the data of what this looks like, you're talking about onboarding potentially hundreds of new people in your company just to do ESG. And so that's going to make some big impacts. When you think about how you can curtail some of that future cost, or you can avoid some of those costs, I've seen a lot of people move into intelligent automation to do that, right? Like, here's the requirements. It's a compliance requirement that we have to do. And so it's very black and white. Here's the business rules. Here's where the data lives. Let's bring in the bot to collect everything, clean the data, and then submit it to the local and the federal regulatory agencies so that we don't have to hire hundreds of people to come in. And so it's more, I see it more of like a cost avoidance play in that sense. Yeah, ESG is not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. State of California has already said, 2030, 2035, we're going to completely eliminate petrol fuel vehicle sales in our state. You're going to see that impacting things. I know they're already starting to build hydrogen fueling stations in the state of California. You're going to see that spread from West Coast to East Coast. There's going to be more and more requirements that come in each year related to ESG. And it's a perfect opportunity to leverage RPA and a digital workforce to keep up with those changes and to make sure that you are compliant as these things roll out.
We should also talk about where intelligent automation can play a role in cultivating and sustaining alternative energies. Just yesterday, there was a big announcement about nuclear fusion, and the potential of that is really amazing. Although I did hear them say on the news, still maybe 10 years before we have the ability to take advantage of that. But still, that was a huge announcement. So where do you see automation playing a role in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I love clean energy. My background, one of my degrees is in nuclear engineering. They've been doing nuclear fusion for a long time, right? They were capable to do it, I think, starting even 50 years ago. The problem was it took so much energy to actually get it to work. There was never any payback. It wasn't net producing energy. It was only consuming energy. And so the big breakthrough now is that they actually got it to produce more energy than it took to actually do the nuclear fusion. Right. And so that's pretty exciting news. And if Bill Gates gets his way, he's going to start building mini nuclear fission devices, all over the United States. It's still a long way to go, right? But if you think about building smaller scale, multiple location assets, and I say assets, it could be nuclear, it could be wind, it could be solar, spreading those things out all over the United States to meet demand of where people are moving because of the pandemic, to meet demand of where people are going to start living now because of knowledge workers and hybrid workforce. You're going to start to see those things spreading out more and more outside of the big central urban areas, more and more into the rural areas where populations are starting to gather again. And so when you think about those types of assets, you're going to have to rely on more automation, and not just software automation, right? Software automation is going to be a big part of it. It's going to play a big role, but you're also going to need to focus on hardware automation. Because if you think about maybe creating 10 gigawatts of electricity in one location, because you're centralized, you can streamline. And that means less people are needed on site to focus on safety and production and all the other things that go along with it. But now you take that 10 gigawatts and you spread it out over 100 different locations. It becomes much more burdensome to manage that, right? But you're not going to need to go out and hire 100 operations teams to go out to those 100 locations. You can now leverage hardware and software automation to play a big role in managing those assets from a remote area and automating as much as you can. And so it's going to play a big role.
What I've heard from a colleague at Blue Prism who came out of the wind energy industry, the key to wind energy is keeping those wind turbines up and running at all costs. And when you talk about wind farms that have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wind turbines, some of them even in the ocean, it's a struggle to keep them maintained, keep them up and running. And the data is there. It's not that they lack the data. They need a better and a faster and a more efficient way to react to the information that is captured by sensors on these wind turbines. So to me, that's a no-brainer. That's a great connection of intelligent automation to clean energy.
Right. And let's just imagine for a moment that software automation wasn't a thing. Digital workforce wasn't a thing. You would have to go hire 100 operations teams to be there on site.
Yeah.
To flip physical levers, to cleanse data, send out invoices to customers, you name it. To physically have a warm body in a seat doing those things and moving things from point A to point B. And it's just companies like SS&C, Blue Prism are now to support that diversity of where your assets are, especially in the alternative energy space,
right?
To maximize on profitability of these companies, to maximize on where you can put these things and really support them as they play a key role in ESG in the future.
So we've talked about a lot of challenges facing energy companies. Where do you expect automation can and will make the biggest impact for these companies?
I think oil and gas has been burned time and time again, right? Boom, bust again. And so what cyclical industries like that need is they need a core team that are supported by digital workers, right? You get out of this hire thousands of people, fire thousands of people kind of mode, and you get into a core agile team with excellent subject matter experts that know exactly what's going on, and you stabilize that team and you incentivize that team from a human perspective to perform really well. And then a lot of the mundane kind of robotic tasks in the background, you can outsource to digital workers, right?
Yeah.
You can be collecting, reviewing, analyzing, cleansing, moving things around, automating reporting, and moving things to a space where that agile core team can do exactly what it needs to do. And so huge relevant use case in power utility companies, huge relevant use cases in oil and gas. I mean, even front office spaces, where you typically wouldn't immediately go to find value, maybe with a digital workforce, you're now seeing more and more adoption in the front office space. Meaning if you can get a power trader or commodities trader in oil and gas, a couple more hours a week can mean the difference between a better trade and maybe not so good a trade. And when you operate at huge scale, you can see some pretty impressive savings just by giving back a couple of hours a week, by having that person focused on market, focused on their customer accounts, focused on relationships, as opposed to maybe putting together a PowerPoint presentation or doing some reporting that they did previously. And so you're seeing it across the food chain. Front office, middle office, back office is really starting to leverage this. And it's going to smooth out that hire, fire, boom and bust cyclical curve that you've seen over and over again. And just to point to one use case, here in Texas, when we had Winter Storm Uri, when it came through, it was really about 9 days, right? It was about 9 days that it really impacted the state of Texas, at least. It created over $1 billion in losses for power utility companies. A lot of those losses were coming from companies that weren't hedged correctly, couldn't find power in the markets. They were forced into spot pricing, paying $9,000, $10,000 per kilowatt hour. And you saw a lot of that transform post Uri because people are now looking at the situation differently. Now they're automating some of the safety valves they've got internally to hedge and to make sure that they're not exposed to the risk of weather. And a lot of what happened in that storm didn't necessarily happen because people weren't prepared. I mean, it started way up north in Canada. It crept down the East Coast. Houston specifically was sending gobs of natural gas up the eastern coast, gobs of heating oil. Really, by the time it got to Texas, we had depleted a lot of our reserves. We had sent up to the Northeast. And so when we got shut down, it caused a huge power crunch. That power crunch means prices spike. Well, now they've got bots that are in there actively operating to make sure that they're hedging appropriately based on weather events, right? And Uri was a big event, right? But people now recognize that there's a lot of risk in those events. And even in 9 days, it can cost companies billions of dollars. And so they're using bots in new and different ways and automation to make a big impact on their business. They're not necessarily relying on Carl, the hyper trader in the home office, to tell them when they need to do something. They can program it, they can automate it, and they can do some of those safety things today better than they have ever in the past because of automation.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. I immediately think of you every time the energy industry comes to mind and the huge opportunity for automation to help transform that vertical. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts. This is actually the last episode to be published on Transform Now for this year. So it's very appropriate to wrap this up by saying Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thanks again, Sean.
Brad, Merry Christmas, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.